Here we go. Michelle, Jennifer. Let's see. Jennifer from Oakland. Very nice. I'm in Alameda. We should grab coffee. Jennifer.
Nice.
Where in Oakland are you?
I live in Grand Lake.
Oh, nice. Very nice. I'm on West End by Target in Alameda. If you come here.
Cool.
Hot over by you too, huh?
Well, technically I'm in Southern California right now visiting my mom to escape the heat wave.
So smart. So smart. It's very hot. And Jess is from Marin. I didn't know that, Jess. Okay, we have some Chicago, Austin, another Chicago, Seattle. Okay. In the interest of time, we'll have some stragglers coming through, but let's go ahead and get started because we have a very meaty topic today. I am Natalie. I'm one of the co-founders of Talent Collective. If you have been on any of our other partner webinars, you are used to my friendly face of my co-founder, Krista, but she's actually in flight to Atlanta for our launch tomorrow with Miss Kaylee, who's on our panel today. So you're here with me, hence all of the little technical hiccups because I don't normally do these things. But welcome. We're so excited to be joined today with our amazing partners at CoderPad. We have Amanda. She is the CEO who will be kind of leading this topic and moderating this panel. We also have Jess from Box, and Kaylee is the co-founder of Estes Group in Atlanta. And what we are all here today to discuss is hot topics in tech. So as you start thinking about technical hiring in 2025, CoderPad would love to share some insights and data that they've collected. I'll let Amanda kind of expand on that. There's also a survey that, Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong, but they are putting out a survey to recruiters and they would love for you guys to contribute to add any of your key insights. So I'll be sure to send a follow-up after this with the video, their annual report, and the survey. So without further ado, I'd love to pass it over to Amanda. She can introduce herself. Jess, I'd love to then have you go, Kaylee, and then we'll kick it off. So Amanda, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Natalie. As mentioned, I'm the CEO of CoderPad. Excited to be here. Love all the Talent Collective community and always learn so much from these conversations. So hoping for this to be interactive. But let's go around the horn and then I'll kind of kick us off.
Hello, I'm Jess. Also very excited to be here talking about some really interesting topics. I come from Box, been there for about a little over 7 years, and I lead our tech recruiting team. Pass it over to Kaylee.
Hey, I'm Kaylee. I'm based in Atlanta and I own a recruiting firm called Estes Group. And prior to that, I was the head of TA at 2 other local startups here. So I've been part of Talent Collective for a few months and it's been really great. We're super excited to launch Atlanta tomorrow. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Also with Amanda as well. Amanda will be there.
Yes, with Amanda.
Yes,
you
I
get
know.
on a plane soon.
On a plane shortly. But before I do that, for those who I haven't met with, I do like interesting and spicy topics. So I will do my best to be one of your more interesting Zoom meetings of the day. Context for this conversation, we do an annual recruiter and developer survey. So this is these are some topics drawn from our 2024 survey, which was published in the spring. We survey last year 19,000 developers and recruiters, touching on all sorts of topics from skills needed to how does the job market look to what do developers care about, what are recruiters worried about. No surprise, in this survey we added questions about AI and how it's impacting roles, which I want to talk to you about today. We added what people call the soft skills, which I hate because I think they're the harder skills. I work with enough developers to know that they're harder skills. But maybe we'll say non-technical skills, skills around communication and soft skills, and how that's coming into interviewing, as well as management, career paths, all sorts of things. So check out our survey, but we are also beginning now our 2025 survey, if I get my years right. That those results and that data will come out generally around February. But we begin surveying now with the goal of getting 20,000 developers and recruiters this year to give feedback. So if I become boring, we become boring. Please multitask over to the survey, answer some questions. We're still interested in AI and what's going on out there. You know, hot take, are developers being replaced by AI? Those types of things. So what we will talk about today, recruiting for soft skills instead of hard skills. So bringing some data and insights from the survey to kick off a conversation. Excited to hear Jess and Kaylee's perspectives on that. AI, how it's changing everything except maybe the recruiting process, ironically. But we can talk about that. Cheating, is AI used in the interview cheating? And then work from home and top demand. I live in San Francisco. I didn't put my stuff in the chat, sorry. And I feel like everybody's being called back into the office. Maybe all of you have already been called back into your office, but how that doesn't align with what developers are doing or wanting and how that affects recruiting. So those are the 3 topics for today. Let's make this interactive. Add your questions. Natalie will keep the spice up. But to start the talk on hard skills and soft skills. So when we think about hard skills, thinking specifically about, do you have the technical proficiency, the language proficiency required for the job, both in terms of level and depth? The good news is 80% of recruiters report that they're now hiring for devs without formal degrees, which is nice. I don't know if you know this, but I think roughly 60% of developers actually don't even have a degree in computer science. And 1/3 of our developers in our survey actually said they started their career in a totally different field from development and worked their way into development. So the good news is that our hard skills recruiting is becoming a little bit more skill-based. But what was new in the survey this year was how hard it is to suss out soft skills. Soft skills, thinking about things like collaboration, communication, teamwork. And 1 in 5 recruiters actually said this is the hardest part of hiring developers, figuring out how to assess for and what they're seeing there. So I guess we'll stay on the soft skills topic, but would love to hear your thoughts on maybe Jess, Kaylee, how you're assessing for soft skills, how you're thinking about and coaching your clients maybe on how to get the most well-rounded candidates through the process.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off, Kaylee, and you
Great.
add in. Yeah, so, you know, I find it, we had a conversation about this prior, and, you know, I find it that the recruiters themselves actually, it's a little bit easier for the softs to determine soft skills over hard skills, but a lot of the process and the interview process that we administer is like really focused on technical skills, right? There's algorithms, coding, all these different, you know, portions of the interview, and then maybe you might have kind of like a culture interview, but we really have to enable all of our interviewers and anyone that's part of the process to, while evaluating technical skills, to also evaluate some of those soft skills. Like, how do they collaborate with you throughout that interview? You know, how are they dealing with complex, difficult situations? And to always be providing feedback throughout the interview process on what that looks like for that particular candidate. Now, is it easier to assess hard skills than it is to assess soft skills for our recruiters? And thankfully, like, Dana is also on the call today. She's one of my recruiters joining in. So maybe she can even have another take at this. But we find it that the recruiters are more trained in a sense to actually assess the soft skills, like, you know, some of those things around leadership and collaboration and whatnot. Like, are they able to take a very complex, you know, situation or a problem and like kind of dumb it down for, or, you know, put it into layman's terms, essentially, for recruiters who are not necessarily technical. So yeah, that's kind of like my take on soft skills versus hard skills. I don't know, Kaylee, if you want to add into that.
Yeah, I think based on our prep call, like, I really agree with that. I think especially the longer you are in our field and the more reps, the more people that you talk to, I think it just becomes a lot more natural to kind of assess, you know, I have a high likelihood that this person's pretty good at their job, and B, you can suss out, like, can they connect? I had a client recently say, like it's really important for them to be able to connect over Zoom because they are remote. And so, but I also think like on the flip side, one of the biggest challenges that I think you run into as a recruiter dealing with hiring managers is if they're trying to pass on a candidate for soft skills, but they can't articulate why. And so at Greenlight in particular, a lot of the interview process, we would get the technical stuff kind of out of the way and early on, but then the rest of the interview, like we would do a technical Q&A where it's like, walk me through a very detailed project that you did. And it wasn't necessarily to get to the technical depth on that. It was to really try and connect with this person, see how they're going to be on the team. And I'm also kind of a firm believer that not everybody has to be like best friends with everybody that they work with, but they have to be able to like partner and have a difference of opinion in a respectful way. So I think incorporating some of those structured conversations into interviewing is really important when you're more at like that panel round, getting closer to a decision. Early in the recruiting calls, I like to be very, very conversational. Of course, we have to like talk about the specific tech that they're working with and things like that. But I really try to get to know them because I think through that, you can kind of suss out some of the more challenging soft skills more naturally. And once you know the team well enough, or maybe you're in staffing like I am, and you've gotten to know the client a little bit better, you can kind of tell like what's going to work, what's not going to work. So yeah.
How do you coach or like advise? I mean, I feel like I interview a lot of people, but I only interview for my company. So like I don't have as many reps as you guys do. And candidly, I find like sometimes I'm like frustrated when people are like, well, you just know it if you do it enough. And I'm like,
Yeah.
So what's your like best pro tip for coaching new managers, teammates who maybe don't do this all the time in sussing out the soft skills?
I think like stay objective as much as possible through the interview process. We also do a lot of training on biases that might sneak through, and you know, the like me bias, kind of like you don't have to be best friends with them. So like coaching them through typical biases that come up and how can we kind of block those out of our head, but like keep them top of mind at the same time. So I think a lot of enablement for those folks of how to determine those things, and like what does, you know, they have to submit a scorecard here at Box at least, and so like what does a quality scorecard look like, right? Like what are the things that we're hitting for or looking for rather, and you know, how do those things show up, like, and then kind of going back to the objective piece of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, first of all, I would never put somebody who hasn't been through some form of just basic interview training in front of a candidate. I mean, because we all get nervous, like we're all, you know, sitting here across from a complete stranger trying to figure out if they're going to work on our team. If you have no baseline training going in, the bias is going to show up. The nerves are going to show up. You're going to go through 30 minutes and you're going to leave that being like, what did we even just talk about? I have no idea if this person's good or not. So I firmly believe in interview training. And I think smaller teams tend to overlook that because they're just scrappy. They're like, we just got to throw this person in. This person's out sick. We got to make it happen. And it's like, yes, but you want to make sure that when they're going in, they know what they're looking for. And I think also kind of shaping soft skills and like what you're evaluating around, okay, a certain team might have a certain dynamic of what's going to work. And then you have your broader company values and things like that. So what do your company values actually mean? And how do we look for a value add or a value fit? And kind of frame the soft skills conversation around that. I think as long as you stay as laser focused on those things as possible, you're going to be looking at the soft skills through the right lens, assessing things for the right reason, letting go of things that really don't matter. But you have to have scorecards and you have to train your team. Otherwise, it's like the wild, wild west. You don't know what's happening in there, you know?
I mean, the wild west laden with bias. And I
Yeah.
hate nothing more than people are like, they're not a culture fit. I'm like, what the?
I just
does
didn't
that
get a
mean?
good feeling, you know?
Yeah,
It's just
we
not...
didn't have a good vibe. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't want you to vibe. I want you to work with this person.
I hate the term culture fit. I'll just come out and say it. Like
I
I
do too.
do not use that term. If I'm ever training somebody, I'm like, we don't say that.
What do you say instead?
I look for value add. like for culture fit, like my first impression on culture fit when I joined my first startup was like bros riding scooters down the hallway, and I was
worked there.
a mom driving a minivan to work every day, joining the tech startup. So maybe I came in with my own thing of like, we're getting rid of culture fit, but I refuse to use it because I think it enables like people to be like, well, they're just, not the right fit for us. I can't tell you why, but they're just not. So.
Yeah, because we weren't in the same fraternity together, so therefore
Yeah.
couldn't possibly work.
Exactly.
I do love Dana's comment in the chat around having technical people describe what did she say? Break down something for me. If they can explain it to me, I know they're usually a go. I mean, like, if you can translate complicated technical concepts through and like explain what you did, I think that's a great starter question. All right. Shifting gears a little bit, see if we can rile up some controversy. AI, maybe you've heard of it. ChatGPT is going to be a thing. You heard it here first. So we interviewed both the developers as well as the recruiters on what tools they're using and how they're using tools. No surprise, a third of companies are investing in AI, and 38% say they already use the tools for hiring for technical roles, though the most interesting use cases were job descriptions, preparing interview questions, which as someone who wants to think about a standardized rubric makes me a little nervous. Oops. That was a click unnecessarily. And then communicating with candidates through the hiring process. So that makes sense from a recruiter perspective. Here's what the developers had to say. 67% of developers are already using AI, and 60% would like to use it more at work. I will say offhand, at CoderPad, we use Copilot, which is the GitHub AI tool. We've seen roughly a 20% increase in productivity. That does not mean we get 20% more work done. I think that means we get 10% more work done and they work 10% less. And I think that's a very fair trade. I would take 10% improvement in efficiency everywhere. But only 8% of recruiters say they're using AI during the interview process. And even though 2/3 of developers are using it on the job, a third of them say it's cheating to use AI during an interview to help assess or to help complete a project or a problem. So let's just let that one sit. Kaylee, Jessica, AI use by candidates, feedback, thoughts?
I love this topic a lot. Yeah, I think there's two parts to this, I think. So there's like the recruiters using AI, it helps Box. We're embedding AI as a part of our product. So we are also embracing it. And it's unusual for sure. It's different. It's, there's still more development to it. So it's not, it's not gonna, my opinion, it's certainly not gonna take over recruiters' jobs because there's certainly a human element to hiring and bringing people into the culture of your company. But I think will always be there. Now, I do think there's parts of our jobs that AI can help automate or just really kickstart things, like whether that's projects, like you mentioned, like a rubric. It's helped me with creating a report and learning how to use or how to create formulas, right, in an Excel sheet or things of that nature. So I think it's certainly something we should be embracing. And on the flip side of things with engineers, this has been a huge debate at Box of, do we allow it? What's our philosophy on allowing candidates to leverage AI through the interview process? And we're experimenting right now a bit. Our philosophy as of right now, though, is that AI or ChatGPT or any LLM for that case is just like a Google search, right? You can find it. It's another resource or a tool that an engineer can use. If they're using it in their current jobs, maybe they probably should be able to showcase that through the interview process. Now, on the flip side of things, I think we still need to test for critical thinking. I think AI can assist with generating code or ideas, but they still need to be demonstrating or verifying their solutions. And that's the the two-person interactive conversation that we need to have of why did you decide to use that strategy? Making sure they're testing whatever it is that the LLM produced. So that's what we're experimenting with right now. And I'm not saying like this is the way that it needs to be done across the industry, but we want to figure out what's the best path forward for Box. And so that's the direction we're going.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think I'll be honest, I'm a very early AI anything. Like I use ChatGPT on a very basic level. What it's helped me with is on the sourcing side, just coming up with ideas around sourcing, like, hey, give me a list of companies in this space that I can just at least start with. So for me, I'm very open to it. I will say I'm the type of person where I would love to see more training on like the best ways for recruiters to utilize it. And I'm also not one that's going to like jump all in on every aspect. Like if I use it, I want to use it well for certain things. So that's like my personal usage. I think in terms of interviewing, I have the same exact feelings as Jess. Like I think, you know, for the longest time when developers were interviewing, it's whether or not we let them use Google, right? Like that's where it started. Now it's whether or not we let them use something like Copilot or something like that. And I honestly think it's okay as long as you just set the expectations. Your expectations are, it is either, yes, it is okay, we're going to let you use it and we're going to share that with you ahead of the interview and like our guidelines around it, or no, we prefer that you don't use it and we just share that up front. I think it's kind of the same thing. Like if you're on a coding challenge and you need to use Google, like the candidate probably wants to know whether or not that's okay. And they should probably know that before they go into the interview. So I think my recommendation would be that teams just have that discussion and then prep candidates, you know, in one category or the other, and give it a try. But I don't think there's any harm in trying. And quite honestly, I don't think an AI tool is going to get a good candidate all the way across the finish line because there are so many other signals. And from what I know about it, I'm not a developer, but it's pretty basic stuff that's being generated. So you're going to need a developer to add their critical thinking to it. Yeah, so I think
Kaylee, what are you hearing about why people don't want to use it? I mean, at the risk of us all like cheering each other on as to yes, this should be used. Like that most companies that I talk to are uncomfortable with candidates using any sort of AI. Like, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I think it's kind of along the lines like, are we making it easier for candidates to get a job? Like, I think there's like this fear that we're like lowering the bar for people, right? Like we're making it easier to get through the process maybe, or it's like cheating in some way. And I think if you're using it at work, how is it cheating when you're interviewing? If it's just like part of your toolkit. But transparently, like, I don't know the extent that somebody could bring, you know, an AI tool to a super complex interview, but I have to imagine an interviewer is going to know that that's happening. And if they're not okay with it, there's probably a discussion happening. So I don't know that it needs to be like this big, scary thing. I think it's just like set your parameters around like what you're comfortable with and experiment with it. Like, I think what Box is doing is great. Do you guys prep your candidates, Jess? Do you guys talk about that like ahead of the interview?
I think because we're still, or I know that we're still experimenting with this, we can't say regardless whether or not they can or cannot use it.
Yeah.
We have that like that level of transparency, but we are not saying you cannot use it or you can use it. We're actually doing what we're calling like an LLM interview review. So we're looking at every single active interview that we're given, that it's given to an engineer, and basically testing it against ChatGPT or any type of LLM. And ChatGPT is like coming out with new, like, new versions all the time. So we're testing it right now. What we're finding is that for more of like the design types of questions that we ask, it's not solvable entirely through ChatGPT or any LLM for that case. Although coding is though. And so we need to really think how we are administering our coding interviews. And right now, like at Box, we do a 2-hour coding interview, but they're, given they're given a prompt and they spend most of the time kind of working through that. And then they talk together at the end of the process. Now, we're kind of leaning like, we're trying to figure out, as we're experimenting, we're trying to figure out, is that better for them to actually just take home to do a take-home test for coding interview. And that way we can use the time we have to talk through kind of their strategies. Did you utilize LLM? Why did you decide to do that? Walk me through your kind of thinking. And so, yeah, still an experimental phase, but that's where we're at right now.
Yeah. Do you think the team has more concerns about a take home that somebody's going to use, you know, an LLM for the entire exercise because it's at home and nobody was like watching kind of their thought process?
Yes, however, there's like a IDE, like a HackerRank or other things where you can administer the take home test and they do it while, you know, being recorded.
Yeah.
That's something that we're playing around with. And so you can actually see, are they pulling in big box, you know, a big text and throwing it into, you know, an IDE of some sort. So that's, again, still playing around with it, but those are some of our findings right now.
Yeah.
How would, just as you guys talk through it, how are you thinking about changing your interview process? I mean, maybe, and this is part of the take home versus the discussion, but like, what are the other implications on the interviewing process for allowing AI use?
So here, our philosophy right now, what we're trying to do is lean towards like you can use it. Now, there are some scary things where I think some LLMs it has like a voice transcriber. And so it'll transcribe the questions being asked and like will form answers for you. And that's very, very scary. Because we don't necessarily, you know, we don't want to interview the LLM, right? We want to interview the candidate.
Yeah.
We want to understand like why they chose the strategies they did and be able to break things apart and like work together. And so we haven't necessarily figured out exactly what changes, but we're experimenting with these things to understand like, okay, for some parts of the interview process, do we just say like, actually, please don't use an LLM because it can easily be solved this way? Or do we do this take home test? And I think that's probably the biggest change to Box is actually doing this take home test, which we do for interns and different other interview processes or other roles within Box. So yeah, still figuring it out, but it certainly is like, you know, technology is transforming as it has been, as it always will, and we are trying to figure out how can we keep up with that.
Yeah, what we're seeing, particularly in our probably more progressive customers, I'll call them, is like the willingness to use the LLMs, but then the interview process becomes much more similar to the job, right? Which is, here's a take-home project, work on this for an hour, 2 hours, whatever, and then come back to the soft skills conversation, right? Communicate to me what you're implementing, what trade-offs you considered, how you made your decisions, what you were thinking about. Like, let's have a dialogue of, given this context, how would that change your answer, and do the critical thinking, as opposed to what today is often like, I'm going to stare at you coding for an hour and a half. Don't get nervous. There's nothing to see here. Which we all know when you share a screen and you're like typing, like this just triples the typos somehow.
You
it's
can't
like
find
magic how
anything.
that works. Yeah, and you can't find out anything.
Yeah. I actually love that idea, Amanda. Like, I think there's a hesitancy around take-home tests. Like you hear about like, oh, are the candidates going to fall off? Will they actually do it? Things like that. But I love the idea of like, let them go do the technical work kind of as they would at their job in their, you know, little cubicle or whatever, without a person peering over their shoulder. And then let's talk about it, because you're solving for both of those things. And I think if I were to guess, most of the developers that I work with would prefer that. I don't think anybody really loves, you know, a paired coding session. I think I would like really freak out if I had to do a paired sourcing session, you know? So I don't know. I kind of love that. I think that might be a positive of where this is headed. I just think at the end of the day, it's like all about, let's just get clear on expectations, like what's okay, what's not okay. Let's make sure we're evaluating the right things for the right reasons. And let's just have that kind of outlined.
Yeah. And I think the drop-off question is valid. But I think there's like context setting to why we're giving you a take home and what it is. There's the time limit component, right? Like I can assess your work and your skills with 45 minutes, an hour of work, whatever it is, an hour and a half max, like set the limit, not 24 hours. I did talk to a customer one time about a 24-hour, literally 24 hours of work in a take home. Do not recommend. You can figure that out in an hour and a half. But then you take what is a 2-hour live interview, you compress it to an hour and a half at home, and then a half-hour discussion. It's the same amount of time. So why are you dropping off if you can't commit the time to the process?
Yeah.
I also
Yeah.
think like monitor your pass-through rates. I think like what we've seen like, ooh, our questions are being leaked online. And then we look at the pass-through rates for that particular question in the last 6 months compared to the previous 6 months or like pre-ChatGPT or and it's like the pass-through rates are very much the same. So it's like we're actually concerned about something that is not as concerning. So like monitoring pass-through rates, I think is something that we should all be doing as well.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, no, the number of
Yeah.
customers like that where I wish we had the data, and I hope we do this in the next survey, that show candidly like the recruiter talent acquisition panic over AI cheating relative to the developer fear of cheating. The devs are like, what? Like, we can suss that out pretty quickly, or it's actually not, it'll give you an answer, but not a good answer. And I think the talent acquisition teams are like, what are we going to do? Probably because someone up is like, what's our strategy on AI? Which is annoying, but it happens as the person sometimes who does that. But, you know, really just owning that the panic is not really reflective of the reality. It's true.
Well, and hiring's not a perfect process. There is no
Right.
perfect way to hire somebody. You could literally give somebody like an amazing score and they join your team and it is not a fit for them or your team. So I've also learned that over the years that it's all about iterating and just experimenting. And sometimes you try a new idea and it works super well. Other times it gets stale and you do it for a year and then you try something else. So I think this is kind of just a new wave of pressure testing, like, is our interview process sound, and kind of like everything that we've been talking about before. I don't think AI is really that much scarier than Google in some ways, because candidates have been Googling answers, and coding challenges for years. So
I mean,
they Google
we
in their
all said
jobs.
we all said Stack Overflow like 24 months ago, but now we've replaced it with ChatGPT, but it's all
Yeah.
the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love Jenny's comment in the chat about how she's doing it at AngelList, where they have a take-home project, and then the first part of your live interview is actually some form of like answering questions about your take-home. And if you can't answer the questions, it becomes pretty quickly obvious that you cheated or, didn't thoughtfully solve the take-home or used AI to do it. And so you can suss that out pretty quickly. So I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So we're all going to implement AI usage in our technical interviews. Ready? Hold hands. Let's do this together. And then the final hot take that came out of the survey is centered around work from home. But on the left, you'll see when considering a job offer, what's most important to you. Again, this is like 19,000 developers. No surprise. Number one was all the monies. Number two was, work-life balance. And then number three was remote working options. And you can see how it cascades all the way down. I always find it funny down here. It's like vacation time is like next to last. This always makes me laugh. But anyway, neither here nor there. So this is what candidates are expecting, or at least in the survey set. Work from home remains incredibly high on the list, even as we see companies retrenching. And I know Amazon probably was the last big announcement I heard of everybody's going back to the office 5 days a week. Would love to hear how those remote companies are battling this, as well as how in-office companies are dealing with this. The other fun fact I discovered, so I don't know if you guys are familiar with a site called interviewing.io. Great solution for technical interviewing. They do some really good thought pieces. So they did a big developer survey and said, how much willing would you be less to take? How much salary cut would you be willing to take based on these different reasons? And they actually had candidates say, like, I had an offer for 200 versus an offer for 150, and the difference was this, and this is the one I chose. And I thought this data was pretty wild. Mission doesn't totally surprise me. There are mission-driven people. There are many of them. Thank God for them. But then $46,000 was the average pay cut people were willing to take to work from home on an annualized salary. Now, I don't know what the baseline was. I don't know if this is off $900,000 salary and everybody works at Coinbase, or this is like $300,000 were Bay Area, or, $140,000 were in rural somewhere. But I thought this was kind of wild data. So Kaylee, what are you seeing clients think about work from home? Are they raising salaries to get people into the office? Like, what's the status?
So this stat is kind of interesting because I was thinking about myself personally, like what would it take to get me out of my house? And it would
wearing
take the
yoga pants
cost.
right now. It's a lot. I gotta tell you.
Yeah, it would take the cost of like a full-time nanny and all these things to like get my kids to all the places, right? I used to commute to downtown Atlanta 5 days a week, and I started that job. It's like 45-minute commute if you're not from Atlanta. And I started that job coming off maternity leave with a newborn, and we did it 5 days a week, and I think back to that, I'm like, how did I do that? But most of my clients, let's see. So it is definitely still such a hot topic. And I think the clients that are like the hottest about it are the ones that want people to come into the office. So I've seen a variety of scenarios. Most of my clients are still remote in some way, shape, or form. I would say that those clients have the easiest time hiring the people that they need to hire, because they can hire them almost anywhere. And they can also think about, the compensation, like maybe we can target certain geographies that are more affordable or things like that. So those clients, I think, have the easiest time on the surface hiring the talent that they need to hire. I have a few clients here in Atlanta that do have an in-office requirement, and that immediately takes their talent pool down. I think the biggest thing is candidates want it to make sense. If you're a client, if you're a company requiring in office a certain number of days a week, but you have an executive team that does not live in that city, that's not going to go over well with candidates when you're telling them they need to be in the office like 9 to 5 on these days a week, but like your head of HR does not live there. Like, that's just not to me, that's the harder sell. So I think candidates want it to make sense. And I think people just want to be treated like grownups. Like, if I need to leave because my kid is sick, just let it be okay. So I do think that the clients that have the in-office requirement, they're the most opinionated about it because they're trying to win people over with it. And some candidates, the very first 2 minutes of the call, they'll just be like, nope, I don't want to do it. But also like, some people are really excited to go back in. It just is a personal preference. So
do people,
do
you have any clients who pay more, or have gotten the feedback of like, this won't work unless if you're in office, you're going to have to pay more? And they're like, okay.
That conversation's definitely come up. Like, if I'm going to commute, I'm going to need more. And I would say that like the really challenging client that I had, no, they didn't. And those jobs were open for 6 months plus. So it's just one of those things. It's like, where are we willing to sacrifice, right? Like, are we going to pay more? Are we going to offer more flexibility? Are we just going to be okay knowing there's 20 people in Atlanta that do this job, and we'll just settle for that? It's tricky. And then I have a remote client that doesn't pay at like the top end of the salary band, but they are fully remote. They'll always be remote. And they're very much like, we're not flexing on our salary band. We will find somebody that fits this. So again, it's just kind of like, you have to meet with your leadership team. You have to meet with all these people to kind of figure out what is your philosophy going to be, and make it clear and make it make sense to candidates.
Jessica, what are you saying?
Yeah. So, I think candidates really just want to Kaylee's point, is like some flexibility, right? Like, be able to support the needs for their family. They don't want to have necessarily any rigid sort of office hours that they need to be in office. We're a global company too. So our engineers are working with folks in EMEA. And so the time differences is tough. And so for Box, we are asking, per org, it's like dependent on the org. With engineers, we want in-office collaboration with product managers, right? And so, but it's flexible in that it's 2 days a week. And we did hire remotely for a period of time. Those people are, welcome to work from wherever they were hired into. So I think on that side of things, people really want to make sure there's equal opportunity for growth, whether they're remote or whether they're in the office, right? They want to be at the same level in terms of like what opportunities they're given and how they're developed. So those are some of the top things. I also think that like it's such a transition to go from being remote into an office, right? And so people really want to make sure there's sort of mental health support and, you know, and recognizing like the psychological toll that it takes to pull people into the office. And so they want resources and benefits to support that.
Yeah, nothing makes me crazier than going into the office. We are fully remote, but we still maintain a tiny office because we need to get mail somewhere. And I just sit there on Zoom all day there anyway. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, this is crazy. Like, this is just Zoom life. If you've hired enough remotely, I feel for the devs and the PMs who are like, why am I here just doing my Zoom calls from your chair instead of my chair? And I do think the flex on either side is something that I don't feel like managers sometimes have the right mindset about. You know, so to Kaylee's point around like commuting, like, let's be clear, like if you're commuting 45 minutes each way, I am confident some of that time is coming out of your work productivity time. I will take calls really early, really late if I need to, because I'm here. And like, as soon as I put the phone down, I can deal with my kids or whatever it is. But if I have to do that in the office, like F you, like I'll take any call you want after 9, but nothing before then.
Yeah, it's really hard, especially the international teams. I didn't even really think about it in that context, but at Greenlight, we built out a development center in India, and I led the recruiting for that. And so I was taking calls at like 6 a.m. and I was fine with that, but I was in my own home with my coffee. You know, I could take a break, get my kids to school, came back, like my whole day kind of like restructured around that. And if I would have had to do that in an office, I don't know. And also being a recruiter in an office is so hard because you're taking calls in closets, you know, like every call that you have is super sensitive. You're talking about money, you're talking about all these things, and you have to have some like privacy and sensitivity around it. So unless you have a door, which I'm assuming most people on this call don't, it's also really hard to like do our job on a floor in an office. And I think that really came out when everybody worked from home. It's like, oh, wow, I don't have to go hide for this phone call. So
yeah, I also think it's like setting, and I think Box is doing better and better at this, is we have more experience with this kind of global way of working. Is you have to set norms for like when to reach out to each other and, you know, being respectful of each other's time and all these different types of things. So, you know, I think we still have to kind of, we're evolving as like we grow. And that like applies to pretty much everything we've talked about today.
yeah.
Yeah, no, we have a communications manifesto as a company around like what both your expectations should be as the sender of communications, like which channel, when, the urgency, the reply, as well as the receiver. Like if I Slack you at what is 8 p.m. for you, you do not have to reply until your next morning. But yeah, all of that gets lost when you're back in the office. It just gets so confusing. And so just maybe the takeaway is actually to be clear.
Yeah.
Just be clear on
People
expectations.
appreciate that. Yeah. I think I've harped on that like in every section. I don't know why. I'm like, apparently
No,
the
it's good. It's a theme.
But yeah, I think it's just like you just kind of want to know what's expected and know how to operate. Yeah. And I mean, on the flip side, like you could make an argument, like I can make an argument for going into an office in the right way, you know, but it is definitely not for everybody like it used to be. And for developers in particular, I think they appreciate having like a quiet place to work where they're not having a constant stream of interruptions, because that type of work that they do is so heads down. And so like, if you lose your train of thought, you know, maybe you're really onto something and somebody like pops over, like, I think you're losing a lot of productivity in that way. So certain jobs, I just think are naturally less suited for an office environment, especially like an open floor plan type of environment. So.
I mean, I don't miss the arguments over how many lights are we turning on? Like, the developers who don't want to sit by the window because of the glare. Like, we don't want to sit next to the marketing team because they're too loud.
The sales team.
Like,
The
don't
sales
make
team.
me talk to a salesperson. Like, we forget about all this, all the fighting over the like only 6 conference rooms and there's like 7 meetings happening. Like,
Yeah.
in-office life sucked at many levels. Like, what were we doing? I don't miss a lot of that drama.
No, it would take so much to get me out of my house. Hey, I'm leaving my house tomorrow for you though. So
I'm excited. I'm leaving my house tomorrow for you too.
Yeah.
It'll be very fun. Well, I guess any final thoughts, takeaways? Oh, the temperature in the office. Yes, Kate +1. Oh my God. Though the temperature in this office today, I'm in San Francisco, we're having a massive heat wave. It's not impressive to anybody who doesn't live in San Francisco, but if you live here, you're very traumatized by it. So I'm like, the one day I would go into an office for AC, it would be today.
Everybody has a blanket. Remember the blanket days?
I mean, remember the hoodies? I would have hoodies on back of the hoodies, on top of the hoodies in the chair, and like one would disappear because someone else was cold. And it was just, that I think was how the hoodies originated. All right. So we covered off some things, some pro tips on how to suss out soft skills and coach your team on how to suss out scuffs. Say that fast. Suss out soft skills. We talked a little bit about AI and how we're all holding hands and going to let our developers use AI in the interview process, and then also raise our game in terms of changing the process and the questions to make sure we're calibrating on who actually knows what they're doing versus regurgitating what they got out of a LLM. And then I don't know that we came to a resolution on work from home other than it needs to make sense. Which kind of feels obvious, but for some companies doesn't make any sense. Any final words, thoughts? Jessica, Kaylee, what do we miss?
I don't know. Jess?
You unpacked a lot in such a short time. Yeah. No, I definitely took away a couple of things from you, Kaylee. So thanks so much for.
Yeah, you too. I love the survey too. I'm gonna go deep dive into it. I loved the graph that you showed of all the things that they care about. I think that's yeah, that's so important. I mean, money always, but you know,
Money always, yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for liking it. There's a QR code. I have no idea if this works. My marketing team tells me it does, but there's a QR code here, but I think the Google can also find the tech hiring annual report from CoderPad. And we'll be starting our new survey, and I would love your guys' feedback. So selfishly, I think Natalie's going to send you all a link to doing the next survey. So let your voice be heard. Very excited to have your input as we go through it. So please share. With that, I guess, Natalie, the floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you, ladies. That was so engaging. And I have a hard time on webinars, to be honest, like staying focused. I was in it. So thank you for very informational conversation. I did put the links for the report and the survey in chat. So grab it really quickly before we close out. Otherwise, I will send a follow-up email with this recording and those, just in case you didn't grab it. But we would love your participation in the survey. No, that would be really complimentary to their next report. And with that, we will wrap up. Thank you, ladies.
All right. Thank you. Good to see you all.
Have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Bye.